Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Tech Tactics Live, episode 65. Today, we're going to be talking about state of the Porsche market. Before we get started, I want to make sure we thank our sponsor, Pirelli, for without their support, none of this would happen. And all of you that are watching, I do ask, if you enjoy the show, be sure to hit like, be sure to subscribe, of course, comment. And if you're watching live tonight, we are monitoring the live chat feature and we'll try to integrate your questions throughout the show. Again, we're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers, so every one of you can help us get there. Let's just jump right into it. I'm going to introduce our valuation expert on the technical committee, our friend, owner, Columbia Valley Luxury Cars. Man, that really doesn't need introduction, at least in the PCA world, my friend Nathan Merz. Hey, Nathan.
Good evening, Vu. Excited to be here tonight.
All right. Well, let's go into the agenda. Let people know what we're going to cover tonight. Robert? So we're going to talk about the overview of the market, what you've been experiencing, in the industry, what you saw at Scottsdale, and then we're going to go into 5 examples of auctioned cars at the Scottsdale auctions, and that's going to be these vehicles right here. So, how's it been? I haven't seen you in person since the new year, and we're already into February. How are things going in your world?
Really good. January is always an interesting time in my world. Historically in the car business, it's slow between about December 15 to Jan 15. So I always look forward to Scottsdale as kind of the kickoff of my year, kind of get energy flowing and a little holiday hangover, dust blown off. And so, yeah, it's real interesting to get out there and just kind of take the temperature. One of the really interesting things that's been a change with the advent of the online auction is we don't have quite the same rhythm we used to have, 10 plus years ago, where really Scottsdale was the kickoff of the collector car market. Now, of course, online auctions are selling around the clock every single day, even through the holidays. So it's an interesting tempo change, but I still think this season sort of helps put out, the general mood and consensus of what's going to happen. And as most people are aware, there's a lot of volatility, a lot of talk, a lot of anxiousness out there. And so it's sort of fun just to go and kind of be on the ground and look at the body language and what people are saying and what they're doing. And you really can't do that until you're just kind of in that space. So I really enjoy making the trip.
So before this event, during the holidays, as you said, it used to be kind of a little bit more dormant and not as much was going on. Now that we have all these online options, is it normal business, or is it still soft because people are in holiday mode, and do sellers not want to sell cars, after December 15th? Or is it a good time to maybe buy because there's not many people looking? How does that all work?
It's an interesting one because it used to be that there was so much seasonality in this market. People would say, for example, don't sell a convertible in the winter and don't sell over the holidays. The online auction really has changed that environment quite a bit, because one thing that happens is during the holidays, people have more free time and they're at their in-laws' house, and frankly, they don't really like their in-laws that much, so they're secretly on the corner of the couch and they're surfing one of the online auctions instead of interacting with great Aunt Mildred about her same story about her broken hip. And so it's kind of fun. You see a little bit of an uptick in activity. I will say, however, you certainly never want your auction to end on an actual holiday. Mm-hmm. Like ending an auction on a big holiday is
like on
not going to go well for you. Yeah, generally they don't do that, but even like Labor Day, 4th of July, people are out at the beach or they're out with family. It's just, oddly enough, the best time to end an online auction is during the middle of the week, during the workday. And one would think logically, okay, it would be better in the evening because the person buying would be off work. But the reality is the average American, particularly the one that have the resources to be buying stuff that's just extra money, if you will, mm-hmm. They're sitting in their cubicle or in their office and they're bidding on this stuff when they should probably be creating a new spreadsheet or finishing a project.
So do you get special requests during the holidays before Scottsdale of things that, hey, can you find me this? Can you sell this for me?
It's more buy. You get more calls from people that want something in particular, maybe for a spouse or a loved one. We've certainly done the, deliver cars with the big bow on it kind of thing, which is always a fun thing. But that's so hard to pull off, that kind of surprise, particularly for a married couple. I don't actually oftentimes advise it. It doesn't necessarily go over as well as we might think it will.
Yeah, my wife has definitely told me she does not think it's romantic if I bring home a car without telling her. She's told me that many a times. So
it's probably because she knows it's going to be for you.
Yeah, you got that right. So what was it like, landing in Scottsdale in terms of, I think, our world was kind of turned upside down a few years ago, and we're kind of working our way back to normalcy. Did it feel normal pre, 2020?
From an energy and a attendance standpoint, absolutely. One of the biggest changes was the fact that we had the smallest amount of auctions present that I can recall in the last dozen years. So, obviously Barrett-Jackson was kind of the big 10,000-pound gorilla in the space. They really got auction week kicked off in Scottsdale, and then other players entered the market, be it direct competitors to Barrett-Jackson, someone like a Russo and Steele, or a Mecum, or a higher-end European-focused auction like an RM or a Gooding & Company. What's interesting this year is that Barrett-Jackson was there, and they were out in force, but other auction houses didn't show up. So, for example, Gooding & Company decided not to have an in-person sale for the first time in at least a dozen years. That was quite a big change. We didn't see the newest entrant to the market, I think, who's going to make a big splash, which is Broad Arrow. They decided to devote their attention to the Amelia sale. Russo and Steele was not there. Worldwide was not there. So really, it was kind of a three-party auction. It was Barrett-Jackson with, we'll look at the numbers in a bit. They're the big player. And then really we had RM, and then we had Bonham. So I think what we're going to find out is the importance of Scottsdale in the collector car world is going to start to shrink. And I didn't think that day would come, but really it's kind of going to be bi-coastal, and I think the two big sales are going to filter out and be Amelia in March in Florida and Car Week in August in Monterey, and then we'll have a smattering of other sales other places, but I think those will be the big two sales of the year, and I think Scottsdale's overall importance is going to shrink, particularly in the Porsche market.
Yeah. So what was your initial impressions of the overall inventory of Porsches in Scottsdale?
I think I sent you a spreadsheet. I can't remember if it was 121 cars that they've auctioned off in January. I'd have to break that down. Let's see if I know what the number was. Yeah, it was something like that. But of course, many of those cars were Mecum, because what we did when we looked at this data, we actually combined both the data from Mecum, which happened in Kissimmee just a little bit earlier in the month, as well as the three sales. Oh, there we have it up on the slide there. So across those four sales, 126 Porsches, it looks like, were listed, and we'll delve into some of those. But certainly a lower number than you would have had in the past. In particular, not having Gooding there present was a pretty big. They typically bring 20 or 25 pretty high-end, high-tier, high-caliber Porsches. Whereas, for example, Barrett-Jackson sells quite a few Porsches, but their specialty is not a lot of, higher-end Porsche. So that's a smattering of, driver quality 996s and E1 Cayennes and other things. Nothing wrong with those, but just a less collector and more driver Porsche.
Now, how about collections of cars? Were there batches of cars from one person or one owner?
I didn't really see that concentration. Sometimes they'll announce the Nathan Merz collection is coming or something like that. There wasn't any notable large collections on offer this week. I always think those are always kind of funny too. I'll go on record and say if I randomly get hit by a bus and I die, I do not want the Nathan Merz collection. One, I just think that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. I would feel so awkward. And two, sometimes I think it's better to kind of, push a few cars out at a time. The market sometimes gets saturated when you see, 30, 40, 50 cars hit all at the same time.
Yeah. Huh. So do you want to go into the 5 cars or anything else you want to share with the overall market?
Well, a couple things. Before we get into the cars, I do want to give a big shout out to my friend John Wiley with Haggerty. And I want to give him a shout out because he is our data geek. I couldn't do what I do without him. So I keep kind of a 10,000-foot view of what's going on, and he gets down to the minutia. So I kind of told him, I said, hey, here's what I see, here's what's going on. And he sent me a spreadsheet with like 1,700 different columns that I could cut and paste and skew and analyze 100 different ways to Sunday. And so I want to give him his due. So a lot of this data comes from things he's analyzed. And of course, Hegarty does a really, really good job in this space. A lot of people ask these questions about, well, how does Hegarty get these valuation numbers? Because even though the public auctions, whether they be online or in person, are other people can see them, the bulk of the sales, about 75% of the sales, actually happen privately. And so the thought is, well, we don't necessarily know what transactions those are. The beauty that Hegarty has is that they insure a large chunk of these people. So they get to see oftentimes what the seller paid as well as what the buyer paid as part of the insurance process. So they get a sneak behind the curtain, if you will. So that's where some of this information will come from tonight.
Cool. Very good. And I think you've shared with us before, but what does it mean for you to be able to actually see the cars in person, touch, feel, and then make a determination on value as an industry expert?
It's absolutely everything, because this isn't going to be any secret reveal to someone. Cars always look better online or in an auction catalog than they do in person. And the difference when you grade a car out is all in the subtlety and the nuance. And so if I tell you I'm an expert on the value of a given car, but I actually haven't touched, seen, inspected any of those cars, I'm really not an expert. I'm a liar, right? Everyone can be sort of a couch expert. I can see, oh, look, I saw this car and bring a trailer. You know, it looks like my car, therefore my car is worth that. Well, you might cheat yourself one way or the other. You may actually have a better car than the car that's sold online, or in fact, you may have a lesser car. So what I actually do is I go to all the auctions and I make a notes of any of the Porsches that are of interest to me or in my market space, and I go look at them, and then I actually grade them, and I take a photo. If you ever see me at the auction and it looks weird, the way I do it is I literally just, as sort of my cheat notes, I give them a grade of 1 to 4, and I'll literally hold up my hand. And you know, if it's a grade 4, I'll put 4 fingers up, and then I take the photo with the description of the car. So when I thumb through the pictures, I go, oh, I graded that car a 4, or I graded that car a 2. And so it's a really quick way for me. Oftentimes, let's say someone will call me and say, hey, I've got an M505 slant nose car similar to the one that's sold at RM. And I'd say, okay. And when I inspect their car, then I'll pull up my notes from when I inspected that car. And I'll say, oh, I graded that car as a 1 minus. And then I'll generally take photos of anything that was a value deduct or a quality deduct. Mm-hmm. And that's just all saved in my archive as a way of being able to benchmark the various values.
Oh, that's a cool tip. That does concern me, though, because when we traveled together, you did hold up 4 fingers when you took a picture of me.
Yeah. Well, I was actually being nice, Vu. I would have put you more into the needs full restoration category of 5.
Nice.
But we're friends, so.
Yeah. All right. So we've got some cars to cover. You ready to go into them?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So the first car up, please, Robert. And I don't think it was the 959, although, is it the 959?
I think this is up just because this was the high water mark for the sale.
Oh, okay.
This was the most expensive Porsche that went through the sale. So this car, let me see if my notes were on what this car sold for.
Gorgeous 959, white with white wheels.
16825. So wow. There you go. Just chump change for us very wealthy Porsche people, Vu, right?
Yes. And do we know, I think there's a factoid about 959s. When you lift the rear engine lid, no matter what color the 959 might be, inside the engine bay, the color is?
Gold.
Gold. Why is it gold? I don't know.
I don't know, because you know when you open the engine compartment, it's going to get very, very expensive when you have to work on it.
Maybe that's it. Yeah. All right, here we go. Now, first off, I know slant noses can be polarizing, but can I, as a person that does a little bit of photography, I'm a little bit distracted by how washed out this photo is.
Exactly. So let's talk about this car. So the 5 cars and kind of overview that we're going to be discussing tonight are very interesting because they're kind of a case study. All these 5 cars are cars that have sold publicly sometime between 2018 and currently, and we're back on offer at Scottsdale or in January, I should say, at one of these 4 auctions. It allows us to basically look and see, okay, what did it sell for before? What did it sell for the next time? And what does that say about the car, the market, the presentation? So the first car we're going to talk about is this 89. It's a 930 turbo and what we call an M505. Very, very expensive option package when new. Of course, we commonly call that the slant nose or the slope nose cars. And it's an 89. So actually, I take that back. We're out of order, I should say. This particular car is an 88. We'll be talking about an 89 in a moment, but this one's an 88. This car is very interesting. So this car was sold by a private seller back in April of 21 on Bring a Trailer, and the car sold for $181,000, including Bring a Trailer's $5,000 fee. Now, what's interesting about this particular sale, if you scroll back to that very first picture, is this breaks my heart. This picture itself, I would argue, cost the seller $50,000. It's a horrible photo of that car.
I agree.
If you could take a photography lesson of how not to take an opening photo, this would be it. It shows the car. The paint looks very chalked out. You've got a lot of distracting. You got green grass, which doesn't go well with the red. You've got the building. You've got the F-350 and the car trailer.
Yeah, exactly. The trailer. It's a lazy photo. It's a very lazy photo.
It just says, I'm not a nice car.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, I think this is an instance where the seller cost himself money. And had he hired, for example, a professional, he would have got a much better result. Now, what's interesting is, so it sold for $181,000. Obviously, someone was on their A game because the buyer was none other than a dealer. And the dealer, I think, saw this and thought, well, there's an arbitrage opportunity here. It's poorly presented, and we can reintroduce this car to the market. So they paid $181 for it, and the car sold at the Mecum-Kissimmee sale. And here's where it gets interesting, Vu. The car sold for $225,500. So those of us who use some basic math, we'd say, well, gosh, that's not so bad. The seller made about $45,000. That's not so bad. But let's actually back up and analyze, did this seller make any money? Well, he paid $181. It hammered for $205. They report that it sold for $225.5 because that includes the auction house's fee. So the actual hammer price was $205. So the net to the seller after he paid the auction house was $184.5. So he held onto this car for 18 months, and assuming he didn't spend a dime on anything on the car, which is not likely, he only made $3,500. So real world, they lost money, even though they bought this car, I think, right. It was poorly presented. So I think the key takeaway on this particular sale was the original seller had a poor presentation. The photography really cost him his sale. And then the seller, too, how come he didn't do better? Well, the reason he didn't do better is 2 things. Number one, I would say he was too late to the party. Market peak, I think, was this past summer. Had this car, for example, been sold in August in Monterey, I think he would have gotten a number more like 250 if it was well presented, or 260. So I think he missed market peak a little bit. And I don't know that Mecum-Kissimmee was exactly the right venue for that car. I probably, frankly, would have made some significant improvements and made a more professional presentation. And I think it might have done better on Bring a Trailer, particularly if you would have had quicker movement in the market. So an interesting case study where at first glance you think, oh gosh, someone made $45,000. And when you actually analyze it, they actually, if they were lucky, broke even.
Wow. So it's not as clear cut as the simple math that you would do. And maybe as an individual, if you were to have enjoyed it for several years and then you sold it for that much, you would be happy that you pretty much got your money back from owning that car. But for someone being in the business, I would say that probably wasn't the best investment.
No, that didn't work out well. But I guess sometimes, in our world, if you just get your money back, it's okay, and you move on to the next one. So we'll call that a break even.
Okay. All right. Next one. What do we have?
Okay, so this is sort of interesting. We got these a little out of order, but now this car, this is also a very interesting car. It's also a 930 M505, but this one's an 89. And for those of us who know anything about 930s, the 89 is kind of the holy grail because, of course, they got the G55 speed.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, I'm an outlier. I actually think the 4-speed fits the character of the 930 quite well, but the market disagrees with me. And from a rarity standpoint, the 89 is always going to be the cherry on top.
Mm-hmm.
Porsche delivered 76 North American M505 89 cabs. So it's one of 76. There's a few more that were rest of world, but certainly an unusual car. It's finished in an iconic color combo of triple black, and it had just under 8,000 original miles.
Wow.
I looked at the car. Car was presented very well. I would have graded the car as a 1-, so quite a nice car. The car achieved a pretty record number, 417.5.
Oh,
so amazing, right?
Wow.
So let's analyze, how did our seller do in this instance? Well, this car sold at the very same sale 3 years prior. So it sold at the RM sale here in 23, but the consignor purchased it at the RM sale in 2020. They paid, or what they paid is $280,000. Okay? So we look at that, and if we do our basic math, we say, gosh, they sold it for $137,000 profit. Not too bad for a 3-year hold, right?
Yep.
But let's back up a little bit and see how that really boils out. It sold for $417,000, which means it hammered for $375,000, which means that the consignor netted $337,500. So we know they paid $280,000, assuming they didn't pay anything for transport, insurance, no repairs whatsoever. They made $57,500.
Mm-hmm.
If we put that in our little finance calculator, that calculates out to a 6.42% rate of return.
Oof.
So not terrible, but mind you, this was probably the most visible, successful sale during this period. So really an interesting analysis when you look at it that way. One other way you can look at this is you say, okay, the seller knocked the cover off the ball. They made $57,000. But do you know who really knocked the cover off the ball with this car? Any guess, Vu?
Mm-mm.
Our friends at RM. They made $80,000 to sell it this time, and they made $53,000 to sell it last time. So selling the same car twice.
Selling the same car twice and getting the commission.
They made $133,000, and the guy who actually carried the cost of it the whole time and maintained it made $57,000. So basically, if you're making an investment, which side of the business to be in? The auction house. Because if price goes up or price goes down, they still make their fees. So it's a pretty good little gig.
Wow. But, I mean, the market, it's an indicator of the market that car got to 417 in just 3 years. If you're just looking, last call price on last call price, that's a strong number.
It's a really strong number, and I think it really represents, for guys of your and I's age, whether you like it or you not, the slant nose cars are somewhat controversial, but much in the same way as the Countach might be, there really is no more, I hate this word because it's so overused, but it's so true, iconic car of the 80s. Yeah. If you're a teenager in the 1980s, this is your poster car.
Yeah, I have a poster of that car in red from when I was in high school. It was on the wall.
Yeah. Yep. And so in the grand scheme, while $417,000 is a lot of money, in the super blue chip collectible world, it doesn't even enter the fray. So I would argue there's still upward potential in these cars over the long haul. Can they cool down with the current market? I think that's a possibility. But I think when you start looking, 5, 10, 15 years out, I think this is a pretty solid choice for somebody.
Very cool. So let's fast forward to a bit more of a modern cabriolet. Let's move to the 997 Speedster next.
Okay, yeah, this is an interesting car. So the 997 Speedster, this one's finished in pure blue, which is the color which is unique to this car. Gorgeous car. So this car sold publicly back in September of 2020. And then it reappeared at the Kissimmee sale. So it sold publicly in 2020 for $239,800, which really isn't that much more over what it costs new. So these cars really have just about kept up with inflation. They've had some peaks and valleys, but really haven't made really large traction yet. And then the car just resold at $368. So again, if we really analyze this, we know that the seller paid $239,800. After they pay all their commissions, they netted $297 for a return of about $57,000 over 2.5 years. Not too bad. I think what they did there is number one, they picked a better venue. I think that selling that car, it was at Saratoga Auctions in September. It's a lesser known small sale. I don't think it had the eyeballs. I think that's why it underperformed when it sold previously. And then I think this car sold at Kissimmee, so it was a better venue. Now, just like we talked about on the other 505 cars, I think they were a little bit late. I think there was probably an extra $30,000 or $40,000. I think this car might have touched $400,000 had it sold, for example, in May or June. So they've come a little bit off the peak. But overall, this seller did fine. He made $57,000. And frankly, get to have this gorgeous car in his garage for 2.5 years.
But do you think, I mean, if you talk about the 88 and the 89 930s that we just went through, that those cars have the icon factor. And I know this car was an homage to, earlier Speedsters, but I don't consider this an iconic car, and I hope you don't hate me for saying that, but do you think there are, maybe it's just because of my generation, do you think there are people that look at this car and say it's an iconic car?
I think one of the things that gives us credibility, Vu, and I really appreciate, is that we speak with some honesty and transparency, and certainly everyone's going to have their own opinion. But to me, in the history of Speedsters, if we look at sort of homage really cars, so if we look at like the 89, the 94, the 2011, and then the 991.2 Speedsters, I would argue that this is the least well executed of all those. Porsche really just, I don't know if it was just because the economy wasn't great in 11, but the number of changes they made to the car, they just kind of, in my opinion, kind of mailed it in. I mean, I think the best part of this car, frankly, is the pure blue color.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm glad you feel that way, because it's not it's not that I don't like the car. It's just I felt like
it's a great car.
It's a great car, but
it's a
if you're
lightweight
call
for Porsche.
Yeah, if you call it a Speedster, I think it needs to be, to me, a bit more true and a little bit more distilled. And this car kind of seems like an over the top, lots of options, and I don't know. It just never has. And it's
PDK
big.
And regular sports seats and no real lightweight approach. So it didn't really, to me, hit the ethos of Speedster. I certainly wouldn't kick it out of my garage.
Yeah.
But
have you driven one? Have you driven one? What do they like to drive?
It's just like driving any other 997.2 power kit cabriolet, with PDK. So it's great. I mean, 997.2s are great cars.
Yeah.
But not materially different than that experience.
But I agree with you, the fact that this pure blue is such a, it's just eye-catching. It's a beautiful color. That in itself probably worth thousands of dollars in bids just because of the bright color. And what colors did they come in?
Pure blue and white were predominantly. I think there's a couple in paint to sample, but the two colors that were pure blue is the bulk of them, because that was the signature color for them.
Okay. All right, so let's go to another cabriolet, but in much earlier years of Porsche, and this is a 64 356C, I believe.
But it is a coupe.
Oh, it's a coupe. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, now this car, I wish I actually had more information about this car, and I will be the first to admit, it didn't make my sheet of cars to look at closely at Barrett-Jackson. They have almost 2,000 cars, so it's hard to see them all. But let's back up a little bit. This car actually sold on Bring a Trailer back in August of 21, so about 18 months ago. And this car sold with the fee for $41,737, which, if you know anything about the C market, is very, very low. But the car was in very rough shape. The car had last run in 1995. The longitudinals were completely rusted out. The interior needed a complete overhaul. So it basically needed everything. And it was sold as a project. Okay, so the car sold for $41,737. We don't hear from the car. We don't see the car. And it pops back up at Barrett-Jackson. And they claim that it went through an extensive restoration.
Oh, I think
Because I
not to cut you off, but Robert just threw up the picture of, I guess this was the ad from 2021.
Yes, so that's the Bring a Trailer ad. If anyone's online, feel free to pull it up. It's kind of fun. And the car, like I said, needed some significant work, which isn't a problem. It's kind of fun to have a project. But what's real interesting is that, again, someone bought it for $41,737, and there's two scenarios. And again, I apologize, I didn't get to lay hands on this particular car. One of two things happen. Either someone polished up the turd, we call it, and just ran it, or someone actually significantly improved the car. It's a little hard to say. Clearly, they did a complete new interior. They did do that. They did get the car running. I would argue the interior wasn't done to a particularly high standard, but you can see in the photos. But someone did update the interior, and they did some cosmetic work on the mechanicals and must have got the car running. Now, did they address the rust? Well, that I just don't know. But what's interesting is the car sold for $77,000. So the consignor would have netted $63,000 or a profit of $21,200. And for their $21,200, they would have had to repaint, reupholster, and go through the mechanics and fix rust.
I will pay $21,000 for someone to do that, because that is a steal if that was the case.
My guess is that they probably didn't. My guess is they probably slapped on some really, really fast and cheap paint and did the same on the interior and covered up the rust. But again, I don't actually know that to be the case. So one of two things: either they did that, or they took an absolute beating, because to have done that car right, not even right, but driver quality, you would have spent at least 50 or 60.
Yeah,
and that's very slipshod.
So from the photos I'm looking at, like, I'm drooling because it looks pretty straight. I do notice that the hood, probably at some point of its life, someone bent it, and they tried to straighten it out as much as they could, but the gaps are off there. But still, though, that looks like a very presentable car for $77,000. I mean, I've been trying to chase a 356 for the longest time, and it doesn't look bad in pictures. And
Exactly.
like you said, you didn't get to see if the rust was properly addressed and get a close look at it. So, man, that's pretty interesting that they really didn't net that much for what possibly could have been a large spend to get it to this, auction level.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I will share with my Porsche friends on here, if you're considering buying a car at Barrett-Jackson in particular, it is first off, for every car person, I would highly suggest you go. It's like car show meets Middle America County Fair meets chaos. It's the people watching and the atmosphere. It's a lot of fun. So it's worth going to. But I will say it's not a very discriminating audience for Porsche. Now, there are some really exceptional cars that were sold there, so it's not to say they do not have some exceptional Porsches, but they're not discriminating in that they'll take any Porsche. So the quality ranges from, best in the world to the absolute worst thing you've ever seen in your life. And so it's really, really important that you go actually lay eyes and hands on any particular car you want to buy there, so you know what it is that you're getting.
So when the cars are going across the stage, how much time do they spend on each car, and how many people are in the crowds? Are people phoning it in? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, Barrett-Jackson, they do an amazing job, because it's an experience. You're not just there to buy a car. You're there, again, it's like this county fair party. I mean, the drinks are flowing and the music's on, and in that bidding room, there's got to be a couple thousand people, right? And so most of them are just spectators watching what's going on. And so it's one of those environments where it's really challenging, even sometimes, to tell who's bidding on the car. And so a given car probably crosses the block in somewhere between 2 and 5 minutes, depending on how much action it's getting. And I will say, I would love to know who does their lighting and camera work, because every car, when you watch it on TV, looks perfect. And once you've gone in person and you've inspected those cars, it's kind of fun to see a car that maybe you had a different opinion on, and then you see it on the stage across the lights. It looks perfect. So do not judge whether something was a good buy based on you looking at it for 30 seconds on a TV camera. Please don't.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our next car, a 79 928. And from this particular photo, looks like it needs a little bit of attention.
Yeah, now this car is near and dear to my heart. For those of you who follow me, you know I have a 79 928. I think very, very highly of early 928s. I love my car. And so, in fact, when I knew this car was going to be at the bottom sale, it was on the top of my list to go lay eyes on. So there's a little bit of background of this car, which I think will give you some color. The widow of the gentleman who owned this car for a long time somehow got this car to a very well-known 928 expert in Southern California. And originally the thought was they were going to dismantle this car for parts. When it arrived, they felt the car was too good to suffer that fate. And so several 928 enthusiasts sort of gathered and volunteered their time and got the car running and driving and kind of up to a somewhat usable level. And then they ran the car on Bring a Trailer. Now, one of the things to know about the buying and selling in this market is sometimes things are out of your control. So this auction on this car ended on March 6th of 2020. For any of those who are in the financial markets or astute, you know that was a Friday on the single most volatile week in stock market history. And the car absolutely flopped. It did $9,400 simply because that was that week we all thought this is the end, right? We're battening down the hatches, we're masking up with our family, and our life savings are going to evaporate, right? I mean, that was kind of the temperature in the U.S. at that exact moment, right? In fact, it was so bad that not only that, the guy who bid that $9,400 didn't even pay for the car. He backed out. So he backed out, and so they relisted the car on Bring a Trailer just about 6 weeks later, and it sold again for $12,650. So April still wasn't a much better time, but it sold for $12,650. And the cool thing is it sold to a gentleman who expressed a lot of desire to bring the car to the next level. And so I did a little internet sleuthing, and because I was interested, I like these cars. And by his own admission in a few places, he spent about $30,000 over the next year or so getting the car to a better state. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the backstory. Fast forward to last week, cars at Bonhams. I'm excited. I go running over to look at it. And what I would say was it was probably it started as kind of a pretty tired driver that someone has spent a decent amount of money and kind of maybe took it to a reasonably palatable driver plus kind of car. Mm-hmm. And so the car ended up selling at Bonhams for $22,400. So based on that, the seller would have received $17,600. So essentially a profit of around $5,000 from just his buy. Yeah. However, he had spent about $30,000 to get it there.
Ouch.
So about a $25,000 loss on a $12,000 initial purchase. And it sort of breaks my heart because he represents, or, you know, a lot of us, right? We just see a car and we feel like it's a puppy with 3 legs and we want to fix it. Mm-hmm. And so he dove into the deep end of the pool and wasn't rewarded for his efforts. I would argue, unfortunately, what happened is he probably started with a car that had too many needs.
Yeah.
And it's one of those ones where if you don't go far enough, you don't get over the hump that people like it enough because the condition still seems rough. But he spent a lot of money. And so it was just probably a bad buy. The other thing that I think bit him, which was unfortunate, and again, these are the things that you can't control, was right next to it at the bottom sale was a 1978 928. And that particular car was VIN number 29. So it was only the 19th 928 ever built. So a very early car. It gathered a lot of attention. It was a markedly nicer car. And so I think if there was an early 928 enthusiast in the room, they all looked at the other car.
Yeah, and we talked about that car in our podcast. It was one that was projected to do anywhere between $50,000 to $60,000, and if I remember correctly, like that car wasn't prepared particularly well for the photos, And all of us here at headquarters, I think we said the max that car would do 60, I think. And that car ended up doing what, 86 or something?
That car did 86.8, and I think where headquarters you might have missed it is you probably didn't key in on how early that VIN number on that car was. The fact that it had Porsche. Unfortunately, that car, I would say, was a quite good car, particularly for a fairly original early car.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a rock star. I would say it was I would probably call it a 3+ condition, which is pretty hard to find for an early 928. But I was real interested in that car because, again, I have another early 928 that is all original that I'm very proud of. I really like. And so I wanted to comp my car as an example versus these two. And the silver car, again, was a markedly nicer car than this 79. But I think the 79 undersold because next to that silver car, there weren't enough early 928 enthusiasts in the room.
Yeah.
That's a pretty niche-y audience. And so I felt a little bit bad for this seller, and I hope he doesn't move away from Porsche based on this kick in the shorts.
So let me ask you this one. You feel bad for the seller who probably took a bath on selling it, but how do you feel for the new owner buying a car like that at 22?
That part I'm excited about. I hope that they recognize, what they got. But here's the problem, and I say this with all due respect because I never want to denigrate a particular car, but I've long told people, particularly on the more fringy type Porsche, try, if at all possible, to buy the very best example your budget can possibly afford, because you can't possibly ever get there. So let's take early 928s. If you had the best early 928 in the world, it might sell for in the low hundreds, right? But if someone gave you an early 928, you couldn't fully restore one for $100,000.
I see what
right?
you're saying. Yep.
So even like this car, the person already got a head start and they bought it for 22 after $50,000 has been spent on it. But there's still probably another $60,000 or $70,000 left to spend. And that's the challenge, right?
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right, so we've gotten through our 5 cars, and I have a surprise for those of you that are watching live. I thought this would be fun. We're talking about the market, and so many times when we're traveling with Nathan, folks walk up to him and ask very personal questions about their own particular car. So here's your chance for all of you that are watching tonight. I'm going to do sort of like a speed round with Nathan and ask him what are his thoughts on the market of a particular car. And I'm going to start it off with a car that Sergeant Tom Bales asked, which was, what are your thoughts on a 1999 996 Cabriolet, which obviously is a Gen 1 car?
Yep. So first off, full disclosure, I own a first generation 996. It's a 2000. Mine's a coupe. I really like those cars. I'll also disclose when the 996 first came out, I was a 993 owner. And so I kind of was like, oh, no. I was that old curmudgeon who couldn't get there. And then when the 996 second generation came out, I thought, I like that car better. And now, circa 2023, I really prefer the aesthetics of the first generation car. And I think the market's recognizing that as well. And the funny thing is there's even a subgroup of people who are really passionate about the 99s in particular. And so they've come back around. And so it used to be, the first gen 996s were really soft. If we're talking your typical driver quality cabriolet, they dipped down into the low teens. And even a really, really nice one would have struggled to bring 25. Unfortunately, the cabriolets, and I think this is unfair, but the cabriolets really haven't seen the recovery the coupes have. And so they're still, if there is the best bargain 911 out there, it's a early 996 cabriolet. And so as a basic rule of thumb on those cars is call them $20,000, give or take 10. So your typical, 83,000 mile enthusiast owned, nice car, not without their flaws, but, an honest car, that car is 20, give or take 2 or 3. A Rockstar 20,000 mile, really, really nice, great color, might be low 30s. And one that's edgy and needs quite a bit of help, and it's got 150,000 miles, 8 owners. That kind of car might be 11 or 12. So, I mean, that's kind of your market ranges. I think they're going to get a little bit better. But right now, there's no better bargain in the 911 world.
I would absolutely agree as an owner as well.
That's true.
Let's go to the other spectrum in terms of cost. From K Guess, where do you see the 997.2 GT3s and GT3 RSs?
Oh, yeah. So great car. I think those cars are going to continue to be strong for a couple of reasons. I think that if you think of the generations of GT3 from 996 through 992, the 997, both the first generation and the second generation, have just an aesthetic and an overall quality that people really respond to. They like the form factor, they like the size, they like the Mesker power plant, they like that it's pretty pure. There's not a lot of comings and goings on that car.
It
and
feels
overall,
very analog.
Very analog, and production values are quite low. Now, my friends at PCNA may not appreciate me saying this, but for example, if anyone who says like a new 992 GT3 is a rare car, you're kidding yourself. It's not a rare car, right? They're making a lot of them. There's a lot on the market. But second generation 993s are fairly rare because Porsche didn't make a lot of them, and the market was not particularly robust in the early 2000 or early aughts, if you will. And so there just weren't a lot of them. So if I were a betting person, would I place my bets if I had to turn it in 6 or 9 months? Probably not. If I was going to bet 3+ years, 5 years out, 100% you will do well with one of those cars. With my only caveat being, please don't buy as an investment. Buy it because you love driving it. Because the best thing about that car is driving it.
That's exactly what I was going to say is you're going to enjoy driving every single mile of that car. And when you decide to sell it, it's going to be hard for you to break free from it, but know that you will have enjoyed it every single mile. Those cars are absolutely amazing. So I love that everyone is chiming in. I knew this would be a fun surprise. And thanks for going along with it, Nathan. Let's go to EAGB. And they have what your thoughts on a 997.1 4S manual. Man, they're getting real specific.
Yeah, no, it's a great car. So 997s, particularly the first generation car, right now we're in the period of their life where I'm going to call them the squeeze. They're getting the squeeze on both sides, meaning that they're old enough now that they're not considered, modern per se to the average buyer, but not old enough quite to feel classic. And so I would argue they're occupying the space right now at their lowest possible value. And so that means I think they've bottomed out. I think they're also particularly affected because they're coming off a lot of noise about the IMS. And then now, of course, everyone's talking about bore scoring. And so it's kind of this double whammy just when people started to feel comfortable, in particular that the late 997.1s had the larger, more robust bearing with a fairly low failure rate, not zero, but fairly low.
Yep.
People were finally accepting that and saying, okay, I can buy a 6, 7, or 8 997 and feel confident. Now everyone's panicking about bore scoring. And so that noise in the market's sort of lingering. But if we talk about the 4S in particular, that car, let's be frank, nobody cares that it's 4-wheel drive. What they care about is the wide body work. And that's what's going to drive the value on that car. And they also love the fact it's a manual. So I think time is going to be kind to that car. I think the styling is going to hold up well. One other thing that's really cool is that Porsche just released their new Porsche Classic radio and infotainment for that car, which fixed my number one pet peeve. I cannot stand that stupid telephone keypad that they have on the dash. It makes the car look so dated and ridiculous. And so I'd get one, slap that new Porsche Classic radio in it, and just enjoy the beautiful sound of that 3.8 liter.
But where will you put your extra SIM card that you want to put in?
I still have my flip phone, my analog flip phone. I'm going to use that, Vu.
All right. Here's a good one from Steven Denkers. Your thoughts on a 93 RS America Fly Yellow with 4 options. Ooh, that's very specific.
Oh, well, this is an interesting one because, in full disclosure, I have a Fly Yellow RSA sitting in my garage, and I'm actually PCA's register for the RS America. If you actually watch some of my videos, you'll see a couple of my RSAs, including I actually have a paint to sample signal yellow one that you'll see in the background of some of my videos. So I'm not a unbiased spectator as it relates to this. I actually worked at the Porsche dealer when RS Americas were new and couldn't afford one. And so now as an adult, I've been collecting them because I really, really like the cars. So they built 4 fly yellow cars, 3 of which were identical. They're 4 option cars that were spec'd by Porsche Cars North America for the New York Auto Show. And so the 4 options, if you're not familiar with the RS America, is the power sunroof, air conditioning, limited slip differential, and radio. The other car, which is the one that I have here, is a limited slip AC car, so no sunroof. In the RS America world, the most desirable specification from a value standpoint would be a limited slip only, and that's simply because that's the purest expression of the lightweight theme. Mm-hmm. Many people have questioned if you have an RS America with all 4 options, well then really what you have essentially is a C2 with a rear seat delete and cloth sport seats. I don't necessarily share that opinion 100%, but that is some of the noise that's out there. So, the 4 option cars generally trade lower than the sunroof delete cars. That's the primary option that people want. With that said, color is an enormous driver because the RS America came with a very limited palette. There are only 8 known paint to sample RS Americas, 4 in fly yellow, 1 in signal yellow, 1 in blue turquoise, 1 in maritime, and 1 in Peru red. Those are the paint to sample cars. So depending on the mileage and the condition, those cars will do very, very well. I don't know the particulars on that car, but it should do in excess of 250, depending on the venue and the absolute quality. So very cool car.
What's crazy is I remember the days when those cars sat on dealer lots unloved, and they were, this is unheard of these days of a Porsche being discounted, but I remember those being discounted and nobody wanted them.
No, it's absolutely true, with rare exception. I worked at a dealer outside of Seattle, Washington, and Microsoft was real big in this era, and the new Microsoft millionaires were really big into these cars, taking them to the track. And so we literally were calling other dealers and buying their unsold inventory so we could sell them to our customers. And then we immediately literally pulled the interiors out of them and made race cars out of them. Now, of course, a small part of me dies when I think about that, but that's what we were doing in period.
Wow. So speaking of, you mentioned about the importance of color and paint to sample. Our next viewer, Arthur Rosenberg, would like your thoughts on a 2011 Turbo S Cabriolet in Azzurro blue.
Ooh.
Beautiful color.
Great car. In fact, I have a 997.2S coupe that I'm actually just hit the approve button on BAT, so I'm going to be running that car on BAT probably in the next week or so. I know those cars well. Great car, again, just like any other 997, the final expression of a design people really enjoy. Much like our earlier conversation, unfortunately, the Cabriolet versions, even though when they cost more new, do not bring anywhere near the robust numbers that the coupes bring, so they do sell at a discount, and there are more Cabriolets on the market at any given moment than the coupes. Doesn't make them a bad car, that's just speaking to market demand. But if it's truly paint to sample Azzurro, California, very, very unusual. That was not a standard color. That would have been paint to sample. And right now, the hottest properties in colors are the blues for cars of this era, because blue, Porsche really didn't have a blue on the palette. They did have Ipanema, which I don't know that I've actually seen a .2 turbo in Ipanema, but Azzurro would be a spectacular color.
And Azzurro blue, if I'm not mistaken, is the Azzurro blue California the same color that was the 50th Club Coupe? Do I have that right?
I can't remember if it's that color. When I think of Azzurro, I think about the color Sally Carrera is like Azzurro.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the blue that we see on the screen here, that's not Azzurro blue.
No.
It's a very light, it's almost silverish.
In fact, this is so funny. I was driving down the 51 in Scottsdale last week, and I saw a new generation Cayenne in paint to sample Azuro blue. And my wife was like, "What are you doing?" And I was weaving into traffic. I was trying to chase the guy down. So if you're listening and you have that Azuro blue Cayenne, call me. I want that car. Oh my God, spectacular!
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. We've got a couple more minutes here. Man, I love how... I'm sorry we're not going to get to all the cars, but we'll get to a couple more. And this one's a unique one. We did talk about 997s before, but I think this one's worthy of note. Will Anthony, I know him well. I've been to many events with him. He has a 2012 997 in dark blue metallic, but what's unique with his is a Targa. Thoughts on Targa? Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. First off, any 9972 is a very hot commodity in the market. Doesn't matter the iteration or flavor. And in particular, 12s are kind of funny because, of course, most people think of a 12 as when the 991 came out. But Porsche did this little half-year thing, and so they were kind of closing out the 997 and introduced the 991 halfway through. And so I don't know the exact production numbers, but the number of 12 Targas produced, you could probably count on about 3 hands. Pretty unusual. Now, I will say the iteration of Targa that Porsche introduced for the 993 and had through the 997, which is really more of a, almost like a panoramic sunroof model, where the glass roof slides underneath the rear window. That wasn't as much of a hot seller for Porsche as the more traditionally styled Targa. And you'll see when Porsche reintroduced the more traditionally styled Targa with the 991.1 in 2015, those cars sold really, really well. And so I think on those cars, the Targa 991, for example, sells for a significant premium over the coupe. In the 996, 997 market, they actually don't bring too much of a premium over the coupe. I do think long-term that will change because of its rarity. And it solves the number one problem on a 997 is cleaning the rear window. I love the fact that Target, you have actual hatchback.
Yeah.
I think they're super cool. And the best part, by the 997 era, they really had that mechanism figured out. They're really drum tight. They don't rattle. Whereas you get into like the 993 or some of the earlier 996 Targas, they suffer some issues with top fit and alignment and squeaks and rattles. And I really haven't seen that with the 997 era cars. So very cool car, and you're not likely to cross paths with another one anytime soon.
There you go. Now, you mentioned 993, and I think in the past several months, if not a year or so, I think we've said many of us have missed the 993 train or boat. It's left the harbor. What are your take on 993s in general right now?
In general or values?
Values of 993s.
Yeah. So 993s are an interesting one because, unlike some models, like, for example, the 964, the 993 never had a period of time where it was out of favor, right? From the day Porsche introduced that car, it had rave reviews and always had rave reviews no matter the era or the time. But that doesn't mean that there haven't been, highs and lows. And so the one thing I would say, if you want a 993, now is a pretty good time to buy one, because while they're still fairly expensive, they have come off their absolute peak, meaning, May or June of this year, if you were looking particularly for like a wide body car, what I would have called driver quality plus cars, not cars I would have got excited about, but the market was touting as excellent cars, were bringing, 150 to 180, which doesn't seem worth it to me, but who am I? Those same cars have come down, and you'll see a couple cars have recently come up, for example, on Bring a Trailer that, struggled to make 120 or 125. And a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, what's wrong? I think that's probably a more realistic valuation for these cars. And so, I think if you can get into one of those cars, a wide body car, that's a good car in the lower hundreds. I think that's a great car. My personal bias, I'm a 95 C2 manual coupe guy. I think that's the one, 993 to own. That's the one I own. I like the narrow body. I like the simplicity of the earlier OBD1 motor. But frankly, if you have a 993, you have nothing to complain about.
Exactly. All right, one more I'm going to force you into. I'm going to force you into a four-door Porsche.
Okay.
In the market, a four-door Porsche, what would you be buying?
Well, this is going to be predictable, Vu. You probably know my answer.
I know the answer. I know the answer.
Okay, what's it going to be?
Cayenne diesel.
Yes. I personally think that my God himself came down from the heavens and said, I'm going to make the most perfect Porsche SUV. And I know this just seems heretical when people said, well, God, you could have a Turbo S or... No, if you haven't driven a Cayenne diesel, and I shouldn't say this because I'm shopping for one, so hold on. They're terrible cars. Do not buy one. They're horrific. But if I'm being honest, I think what I love about them is that the way that the engine on the diesel builds power, it's not fast, but it's torquey and effortless, fits the character of the Cayenne so beautifully, and it makes it such a functional everyday car. But yet it still has the handling dynamics of a Porsche and the steering and the brake feel. And so they just gobble up the miles for the highway. You can get your stuff in them. You can pull your car trailer. It's the ultimate car. If I could only own one Porsche and it had to do everything in my world, that would be the car, and I wouldn't feel punished to have it. So thank you, Volkswagen, for rolling out these cars from coming back. But that is my car.
That's a huge statement from you for a four-door. But if you want to hear more from Nathan about the market and other, market-related topics, we're going to be doing Tech Tactics Live on February 18th from Tech Tactics East in Easton, Pennsylvania. So stay tuned for that. We'll be getting out times and such. Again, February 18th, we're going to do 2 Tech Tactics Live at Tech Tactics East. Hopefully we'll see you at Works Reunion Amelia, March 3rd. Nathan will also be there. We've got a surprise that he might be offering some of our members that are down there a special tour. We recently dropped a video for Macan spark plugs, a review on the Macan T, also a little video on a trip that I took to Los Angeles last year, where again I met with Nathan at the Lytton Toy Meet in Los Angeles. We recently dropped our podcast number 47, so if you haven't checked that out, Porsche Club Insider. If you're not a member, if you're just watching because you happen to come across our channel, become a PCA member. All you need to do is grab the VIN from your car, head to pca.org. And with that, thank you for joining us for episode 65. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.